When the palace gates closed that morning, the world held its breath. There were no royal announcements, no cheering crowds, just silence. A silence so heavy, it seemed to echo through the very halls of Buckingham Palace. And then, out of that quiet, came a walk that would change everything. Prince William and Princess Catherine stepped forward, hand in hand, eyes lowered, hearts burdened with something deeper than duty. The cameras caught it. The nation felt it. But few truly understood what that moment meant. Until now. This is the story of that walk, of unspoken grief, royal resilience, and the day silence became more powerful than words. If moments like these move you, where emotion speaks louder than protocol, then don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Every click helps us uncover the stories behind the palace walls, the ones the world rarely gets to see. Now, let's step quietly into the moment when silence fell upon the palace. The palace had never sounded so still. Even the pigeons that usually fluttered around the gates seemed to pause that morning, as if they too sensed something sacred, or sorrowful, hovering in the air. It was a crisp London dawn, the kind that turns the mist silver and makes every sound echo just a little longer than usual. Usually, the courtyard of Buckingham Palace buzzed quietly with routine, staff footsteps, distant laughter, the clink of tea trays. But not today. Today, the silence spoke first. Royal aides exchanged quick, cautious glances. No one dared ask aloud what they all felt deep down. Something had changed. Behind those grand walls where history had lived and breathed for generations, a quiet decision was unfolding. One that would alter not just royal protocol, but hearts across the nation. And yet no statement had been released. No news vans filled the streets. The silence itself was the announcement. At 7:42 a.m., a lone car pulled into the inner courtyard. Inside were Prince William and Princess Catherine, two figures who carried the weight of 1,000 expectations on their shoulders, yet somehow still looked heartbreakingly human. They didn't arrive with the usual entourage. No fanfare, no aides stepping out first, just the two of them, together. Kate was dressed simply, navy coat, hair tied back, no visible jewelry. William, in his dark overcoat, looked pale but composed. Observers later said he had that Windsor stillness about him, a quiet dignity that barely concealed emotion. But when he opened the car door and walked around to help Catherine out, his hand lingered on hers for just a moment too long, and that perhaps was the first sign. The whisper that spread through the palace. Inside, the staff moved like ghosts. Footsteps were muffled, conversations barely above a whisper. One footman would later recall, "It felt like we were preparing for something sacred, like a funeral, or a farewell we couldn't name." Through long corridors lined with portraits of past monarchs, William and Catherine walked side by side, their faces unreadable. Cameras were not allowed in yet, but someone always talks, and soon word began to spread. They're not here for duty. They're here for something deeper.
Had something happened to the king? Was the queen consort ill? Or was it something between them, between William and Kate, that drew them here together before the world even woke? Rumors started to flicker across the palace like candle flames of a storm, but no one dared fan them into fire. To the outside world, William and Kate had always represented calm, the future of a monarchy constantly balancing on the edge of modernity. But behind that image was a couple who had endured whispers, loss, and quiet moments of exhaustion hidden behind perfect smiles. Sources close to the couple later said that this morning was not planned by the royal calendar. It was personal, rooted in something that had been growing for months: emotional fatigue, worry for King Charles's health, and a shared fear that the family's legacy was slipping away into noise and politics. And so they had come to walk. To let silence do what words no longer could. It's strange, isn't it? In a world ruled by headlines, how something as simple as walking in silence could speak so loudly. By 9:15 a.m., photographers had started gathering along the palace gates. They didn't know what they were waiting for, but their instincts told them something historic was about to unfold. The air was heavy, the kind of air that carries emotion before anyone even speaks it. And then through the tall iron gates, two figures appeared, walking slowly, side by side. William, Kate. The silence broke, not with noise, but with the sound of camera shutters clicking like 1,000 heartbeats. The world began to watch. There were no words from them, no smiles, no waves, just their walk. Catherine's hand brushed William's sleeve once, gently, like a whisper between souls. He turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge her presence. That was all, and somehow it was everything. The world reacts. By noon, social media was flooded with a single image, William and Kate walking together outside Buckingham Palace. Their expression solemn, the palace behind them bathed in pale sunlight. No caption was needed. The silence told its own story. People across Britain and beyond share the image with simple words. They feel it too. The royal family, once thought to exist above emotion, had become a mirror for loss, for love, for quiet strength. No one yet knew why they had walked that morning, but everyone felt something shift. Inside the palace, aides began drafting a statement. It was short, elegant, and emotional, a reflection of both duty and heart. But before it could be released, William reportedly paused, looked out toward the courtyard where they had just walked, and said softly, "Let them feel the silence first." That sentence would define the tone of what was to come. For William and Kate, that day was more than a gesture. It was a message that even in the grandest halls of royalty, humanity must be felt, not just seen. And as the afternoon light faded, a nation waited for words that hadn't yet been spoken. Because when silence falls on the palace, it never means nothing. It means everything. It wasn't just a walk. It was history, emotion, and quiet defiance, wrapped into a few slow, deliberate steps to the heart of the monarchy. The palace courtyard had seen centuries of royal processions, kings riding to coronations, queens waving crowds, guards changing posts with perfect rhythm. But this was different. There was no music, no ceremony, no speeches. Only two figures, walking side by side, as if time itself had paused to let them through. The cameras zoomed in, but what they captured wasn't power. It was vulnerability. William and Catherine's walk lasted less than 5 minutes. But in that silence, they said more than 1,000 press statements ever could. Their eyes were steady, their pace unhurried. Each step felt weighted, with grief, perhaps, or with the realization that something inside the monarchy was changing forever. Commentators struggled to explain it. Was it a farewell? A moment of unity? Or was it something simpler? Two people reminding the world that even royalty feels pain? The British people had always admired William and Kate for their grace, but on this day, admiration turned into connection. They weren't symbols, they were human, and for the first time in years, the royal family felt close again. Cameras caught one moment, a fleeting, nearly invisible exchange. As the pair neared the palace gates, Catherine glanced sideways at William. Her eyes softened. He didn't smile, but the tension in his jaw eased. That single glance, brief, almost unnoticeable, became a photograph shared in millions of homes. Newspapers called it the look that spoke volumes. What was behind it? Comfort? Fear? Love? Perhaps all of it. For those watching, it was more than a look. It was reassurance. A promise that even when the world feels uncertain, even when a monarchy trembles under the weight of duty and loss, love endures quietly. Because that's what real strength often looks like. Not thunder, but stillness. Outside the gates, the crowd grew. People who'd been walking to work stopped, drawn by something they couldn't explain. Strangers stood shoulder to shoulder, their eyes fixed on the couple in silence. No one shouted. No one reached for their phones at first. They just watched. You could feel the unity, fragile but real. It was as if the whole of Britain inhaled at once and forgot to exhale. Then came the first cheer, not loud, but trembling with emotion. Someone whispered, "God bless them." Another murmured, "They're grieving, aren't they?" It didn't matter what they were grieving for, the king's health, the weight of legacy, or something more personal. The people didn't need to know. They simply understood. That's the strange magic of moments like this. They draw nations together without a single word spoken. Inside the palace, Aides watched from the windows, tears in their eyes. These were men and women trained never to show emotion, but that morning broke protocol. One senior advisor reportedly said, "It wasn't the walk itself that moved us. It was the silence that followed it." Because when the couple finally disappeared back into the palace, no one applauded. No one clapped. The crowd just stood there, quiet, reverent, as if afraid to disturb what they had just witnessed. Inside, Catherine removed her gloves slowly, staring at them for a long time before setting them down. William stood near the window, his reflection framed by the gilded curtains. He didn't speak for a while. Then softly he said, "They needed to see that we're still here, still standing." To anyone else, it might have sounded like duty, but to those who knew him, it was pain held steady by purpose. Within hours, the walk became the most watched royal moment of the year. Television networks replayed it endlessly. Commentators described it as eerily beautiful, heartfelt, and a defining image of the modern monarchy. Even in distant countries, where the British crown was little more than a relic of history, people felt something stir. Messages poured in: letters, flowers, digital tributes, each one saying the same thing in different words. "We understand your silence." Social media, usually so loud, softened for a day. Hashtags turned into tributes. There were no arguments, just quiet respect. And for once, the palace didn't rush to explain. No press release, no official caption, just silence. Because the truth didn't need to be told. It had already been felt. Every royal gesture carries meaning, and this walk was no exception. Historians noted how William and Catherine's path mirrored an ancient royal tradition. The walk of resolve, taken by monarchs-to-be when facing times of transition or grief. But theirs was different. It wasn't taken to show power, but to show humanity. Their unity that day spoke to a deeper truth, that the monarchy's survival has always depended not just on crowns, but on connection. Kate's simple attire, William's unguarded expression. Each choice intentional, each symbol carefully human. It was as if they were saying, "We are not untouchable. We are you." And that message, more than any proclamation, reached the people's hearts. That evening, as the palace lights dimmed, the courtyard returned to silence. But something had shifted in the air. People who gathered outside refused to leave, lighting candles along the gates. Some prayed quietly. Others simply stood there, letting tears fall without shame. A man in his 60s whispered to a reporter, "I saw Diana in them today. The same courage, the same grace." Maybe that's what the world had felt all along. Not just sorrow or admiration, but legacy. The unbroken line between a mother's love and her son's heart. Between the pain of the past and the quiet hope of the future. And as the candles flickered against the palace walls, it was clear this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of a new kind of royal strength, one built not on grandeur, but on grace. The next morning, newspapers around the world printed the same image, William and Kate walking in silence. The headline was simple, "The walk that spoke to the world." But those who'd watched it live knew it was more than a walk. It was a moment when silence healed a kingdom. Behind the palace gates, the world falls away. From the outside, Buckingham Palace looks eternal. Its golden balconies, marble columns, and guards standing perfectly still. But step beyond the threshold, and it's not marble you feel first. It's history, heavy, unspoken, and alive. That morning, after their silent walk, William and Catherine didn't speak right away. They walked the same corridors where portraits of past monarchs watched from the walls. Kings and queens who'd ruled through wars, heartbreaks, and endless scrutiny. And yet, none of those painted faces had ever felt the modern world pressing so hard on their shoulders. Because for William and Catherine, the burden wasn't just royalty. It was expectation. It was a weight of keeping humanity alive in a system built on perfection. Once the cameras were gone, silence returned. Catherine sat down in one of the drawing rooms, her hands folded neatly on her lap. The room was warm, but her expression was distant, thoughtful. William stood by the window again, staring at the gardens below where, just hours ago, thousands had gathered. "Did it help?" she asked quietly. William didn't turn. He just exhaled slowly. It helped them, he said. That's what matters. There was a pause. Then Kate rose, crossed the room, and placed her hand gently on his back. And what about you? He didn't answer, but the truth was written in his silence. It wasn't just about the public moment. It was what led to it, the pressure, the whispers, the constant balance between private love and public life. And beneath it all, the fear that one day silence would become not healing, but hollow. Few understand the toll of being both a partner and a public figure. Behind those graceful smiles and carefully chosen words lies a marriage built on more than affection. It's built on resilience. Sources close to the couple had often described their bond as quiet but unbreakable. Yet lately, even that strength had been tested. The king's health had weighed heavily on them both. Long nights, emergency meetings, public appearances layered with forced optimism. It had all taken a toll. There were reports, never confirmed, never denied, of late-night discussions between them about what the future might bring, about leadership, about loss, about whether the monarchy could survive the world's noise. And that morning's walk, it wasn't planned by royal advisors. It was Catherine's idea, a walk of peace, a pause between the weight of duty and the pull of humanity. Catherine had always carried her role with elegance, never loud, never demanding attention. But inside, she was the quiet force that held the family's emotional center. Friends say that when the pressure becomes unbearable, it's Kate who grounds them. She reminds William of his mother's empathy, the way Diana could turn pain into connection. And that day, after the walk, she did the same. Sitting beside him in the study, she whispered, "You don't need to be perfect, just present." It was something she told him years ago, back when they were young, when love felt simpler, freer. Now, those words meant more than ever, because being royal isn't just about waving to crowds. It's about standing still when your heart wants to run. As the afternoon faded, a message arrived from Balmoral. The king had seen the footage. Those who were present said that when the clip of William and Kate walking played on the screen, King Charles went quiet for a long time. Then he simply said, "They've understood it." Understood what? That the monarchy's survival wasn't written in jewels or crowns, but in human emotion. Later that day, William received a brief handwritten note from his father. "There is dignity in silence and strength in grace. Your mother would have been proud." It was short, but to William, it said everything. He folded the note carefully and placed it inside a drawer he never locks, because some truths are meant to breathe. Upstairs, the sound of laughter echoed faintly, their children playing, unaware of the heavy world below. Catherine walked to their room and paused at the door. George was building a model airplane. Charlotte was sketching beside him. When she looked up and saw her mother, she smiled. "Did everyone like your walk today, Mama?" Kate smiled faintly. "I think so, sweetheart." Charlotte tilted her head. "Why were you sad then?" That question, so innocent, so piercing, hung in the air. Kate knelt beside her daughter, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Because sometimes," she said softly, "even when people understand you, it still hurts." Charlotte thought for a moment, then hugged her. "Daddy said being brave means feeling scared but walking anyway." Kate's eyes glistened. He's right. And in that little exchange between mother and daughter lay the truest reflection of what that morning had meant. As evening descended over the palace, lights flickered on one by one, glowing against a London dusk. William joined Kate on the balcony for a moment, not to wave, not for cameras, just to breathe. Below, the city carried on, unaware of the quiet storm that had passed through the royal walls that day. "Do you think they'll understand what we meant?" she asked. William's gaze was distant. "Maybe not now," he said, "but one day, when the noise fades, they'll feel it." And he was right, because sometimes meaning doesn't live in words. It lives in the stillness that follows them. That day, the palace didn't issue a statement. There were no interviews, no royal declarations, just that single image, two figures walking through silence. And inside those royal walls, amid portraits and echoes of centuries past, the future was quietly being rewritten. When history looks back on the monarchy of this generation, it won't just remember crowns and ceremonies. It will remember the walk, the silence, and the humanity that made the palace feel, for one fleeting morning, like a home again. Because inside those royal walls, behind all the grandeur and gold, the greatest power was not royal blood. It was compassion. The palace clock struck 6. The day that had begun in silence was now ending in gold. The evening sun pouring through the palace windows, washing the marble halls in warmth. But it wasn't just sunlight filling those rooms anymore. It was peace, the kind that only comes after truth is quietly spoken, not with words, but with presence. By the next morning, the walk had circled the globe. News anchors replayed the footage on endless loop. Headlines read, "The future of the monarchy walks with heart." But what captured the world wasn't royal symbolism. It was emotion. For once, people didn't see crowns or formality or distance. They saw two human beings, fragile yet unbroken. In schools, teachers played the footage to show children that leadership isn't about control, but courage. On social media, strangers wrote things like, "I felt calm watching them," as if the world stopped arguing for a second. And in that rare stillness, people remember what royalty was meant to stand for. Not power, but example. Not perfection, but grace. In the days that followed, William and Catherine returned to their duties quietly. There were no statements, no interviews, no explanations. But behind closed doors, reflection lingered. One evening, William was said to have walked alone through the palace gardens. The air was cold, the moon full. In the stillness, he could almost hear his mother's laughter, distant, gentle, timeless. And though no one was there to see it, he smiled. Because somewhere deep inside, he understood what Diana had always known. That silence is not the absence of love. It's the space where love breathes. Weeks passed. The world moved on, as it always does. New stories filled the headlines. New distractions took hold. But the walk remained. In photographs, in memory, and in the hearts of millions, that moment endured as something rare, pure. A reminder that leadership isn't loud. It doesn't need microphones or marble balconies. Sometimes, it's a quiet hand held tightly in the cold morning air. For William and Kate, that legacy became a quiet compass. It reminded them, and all who served beside them, that the strength of the crown doesn't come from being above the people, but from standing among them. And for a brief, powerful moment, they did just that. When future generations read about this era of the monarchy, historians will likely mention modernization, global challenges, and shifting traditions. But somewhere between the paragraphs, they'll find a photograph, two figures, walking in silence. No headlines, no speeches, just presence. And they'll ask, what was that moment? And perhaps someone will answer, that was the day the monarchy remembered how to feel. Because every generation has a defining royal image. For Queen Elizabeth, it was a coronation. For Diana, it was her compassion. And for William and Catherine, it was the walk, a moment where silence spoke not retreat, but renewal. Inside the palace, life went on. Meetings resumed. Ceremonies continued. The sound of laughter once again filled the halls where tension had lingered. But something had changed, subtly, profoundly. Aides said William and Catherine began spending more time together privately, often walking the palace gardens in the early mornings. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Their silence had become their strength. And perhaps that is a quiet secret behind lasting love, not constant words, but shared stillness. Because sometimes the most powerful connections are the ones that don't need explaining. Months later, during a public event in Windsor, a reporter asked an elderly woman what she remembered most about the royal couple. She didn't hesitate. "That day they walked," she said softly, "when they said nothing and somehow told us everything." Her words echoed what millions have felt. That moment when silence replaced spectacle and the monarchy felt human again. It wasn't about pageantry or titles anymore. It was about heart. The same heart that kept the royal family standing through centuries of triumph and tragedy, beating quietly behind velvet curtains and golden crowns. And on that morning, the world heard it again. In the privacy of their home one evening, Catherine reportedly turned to William and said, "You know, one day our children will ask about that walk." William smiled gently. And what will we tell them? She paused and replied that sometimes silence is how you speak truth. And that would be their promise, not just to their family, but to the people who looked up to them, that whatever storms came, they would always choose dignity over drama, love over noise, silence over spectacle. Because in the end, silence had done what no speech ever could. It had reminded the world that royals are not untouchable, they are human. Years from now, when people recall the royal family of this generation, they'll remember the glimmer of crowns, the smiles on balconies, the ceremonies of grandeur. But more than that, they'll remember the walk, the morning when two figures stepped into history, not with trumpets or cheers, but with quiet courage. And maybe that's what true royalty really is, the ability to move millions without saying a single word. Because when silence falls upon the palace, it doesn't signal the end. It signals the beginning of understanding. And so, the palace that once echoed with silence now carries a softer sound, the rhythm of hearts healing, of love enduring, of a legacy being rewritten in quiet grace. Perhaps that's the true power of William and Catherine's walk. It reminded us that the loudest truths are often whispered, and that strength, real strength, isn't found in power, but in compassion. If the story moved you, if you believe that silence can speak louder than words, then take a moment to share, and subscribe, not just for the story of the royals, but for the reminder that even in the grandest halls, it's the quietest moments that define us all.